If you ask me, Erica, what can I do to make learning Spanish more fun? I mean, between you and me, it's getting kind of boring. My piece of advice for you is likely going to be use more stories. Stories and reading, as I've told you guys before, played a huge part in my learning of Spanish. They still do. But sometimes I get these questions of how can I actually learn what I need to learn through the stories, through the reading? Can I actually pick up on the grammar that I need? Well, you absolutely can, but I understand that especially if this is the first language that you're learning, you may need some assistance in starting to notice those grammatical patterns. So in today's video, what we'll do is take a very traditional Spanish grammar point, the imperfect tense, and we're going to see how we can go about noticing it and practicing with it with the aid of one of the stories, our most recent story that we have on the channel called Solo un Juego. Comencemos, amigos. All right, guys, so before we actually get into this, I want you to understand, first of all, that grammar explanations are to be used as a tool to help you start to notice patterns in comprehensible input. I'll say that a lot. I want you to start to notice these things on your own. But grammar explanations are not the means by which you're going to learn grammar, even though that sounds counterintuitive. You will not learn how to speak Spanish naturally and quickly without having to think too much about it and go through all of the conjugation lists in your head through the use of grammar explanations. It's not going to happen that way. You will learn to do this in time by being exposed to enough examples, which is why I emphasize comprehensible input, so reading and listening at a level that you can understand so much, so important. However, choosing to focus on a certain grammar point through deliberate, repeated exposure in natural context, so in this case we're going to be pulling it from a story, well, it can indeed shorten the time that it takes for you to be able to use that particular aspect of grammar relatively comfortably, and it just gives you a bit of confidence as you start to master it and you feel like you're really starting to understand the language. So in this lesson, we will first learn the main uses of the imperfect tense and view examples from the story Solo un Juego. And we're going to notice how to form the imperfect tense, and we'll practice with some sentence variation and translation exercises so that you can kind of get your hands in there and get a feel. Now, what is the imperfect tense? Let's just briefly talk about what we're talking about when we talk about the imperfect past tense. Well, there are two past tenses in Spanish, okay? We have the imperfect and we have the preterite. But the imperfect tense is used in a few different scenarios as follows, such as to describe habitual or continuous actions in the past, to describe what something or someone was like or used to be like or would do, used to do in the past, or to set and describe the scene. So the key takeaway here is that these events generally don't have specific start or end times. We're not talking about something that happened at 4 p.m. yesterday or last week or last month at this specific time. No, these are more continuous in nature. Now, there are other uses of the imperfect tense that we won't get into in this particular video. We can save that for another time. And these are things like stating time and date in the past, and also describing physical characteristics of a person in the past. So we'll save that for later. I just wanted to mention it. So right now, let's look at a scene from our story that has a lot of imperfect tense right at the beginning. Part one of the story. I just want you to look at it, look at the visuals, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Rosa sonreía frente a la cama de su hija pequeña, observándola mientras dormía. Ella lucía muy tranquila. De hecho, Claudia tenía todas las razones para tener un sueño tranquilo y reparador. Tenía una madre y un padre que la amaban profundamente y no sabían nada de los conflictos en la familia.
All right, guys, so let's look at some of these sentences. Rosa sonreía frente a la cama de su hija pequeña, observándola mientras dormía. So you can see the translation here below if you need any help with it, but what I want you to focus on are the words in orange because these are the imperfect tense examples. So sonreía, smiled. Okay, so if we can picture the mom standing over the bed of her little girl and smiling, she's observing her while she sleeps. Mientras dormía. We're just describing the scene. We're describing, what's happening. We're not saying that, Rosa yesterday at 4 p.m. smiled at her daughter, because that would go into that other type of past tense that we discussed. This is more of that continual setting the scene type of reason that we're using the imperfect here. Now, don't worry, we'll talk about how to form the imperfect and all of that. I just want you to first get a feel for what it is. Here's the next sentence. Ella lucía muy tranquila. So she seemed or she looked so much at peace. Again, we're describing the scene. We're not talking about a particular time that happened. So we're using the imperfect. Tenía una madre y un padre que la amaban profundamente y no sabían nada de los conflictos en la familia. So her having the mother and having a father that loved her, obviously this is long term, guys. Her parents didn't love her last month, last week. We're just saying that they loved her. So we are talking of the past. Even in English we say loved, but this is the imperfect tense. This is a continual process. And no sabía nada. She didn't know anything about the conflicts within the family. Again, just this general continual process. So how do we form the imperfect tense? You may have started to notice a little bit, but let's just look at some example words from the story. So some we just saw in the clip, and others will be seen in future clips in this video. Now don't worry about the meanings of these verbs quite yet. Don't even worry about the person that we're referring to. Is it I, you, they? Don't even worry about that for a moment. Just look at the general formation. So notice sonreír, we're going to have the infinitive on the left side and then the imperfect conjugation here on the right side. Sonreír changes to sonreía. Lucir, lucía. Dormir, dormía. Tener, tenía. Sentir, sentía. Hacer, hacía. Did you notice any patterns in the formation of the imperfect tense? Right, so for verbs ending in ER or IR, all we're going to do is drop off that ending and add ia. Notice the accent mark on that I. Now, this works in the yo, usted, the él, the ella form. If you look at this chart here, you can see that all of those that we mentioned end with ia. And you can see that to conjugate the verb in the tú, nosotros, ustedes, ellos, ellas forms, it doesn't require too much more work, okay? We still have the ia there. But in the tú, we have to add the s, so tenías. In the nosotros, we add a few more letters, so you still see that ia, but it's íamos, teníamos. And then with the ustedes, ellos, ellas, we have tenían. So all you have to do is add that in, but they all have that ia in there. Now what we just talked about was verbs that end in ER or IR. But what about those verbs that end in AR? Because Spanish verbs in the infinitive form can have 3 endings, ER, IR, or AR. So here are some examples of how we form the imperfect tense when we're talking about AR verbs. Amar changes to amaba. Encantar, encantaba. Sacar, sacaba. Insertar, insertaba. Estar, estaba. So, what patterns did you notice there in the formation of the imperfect tense for AR verbs? Yes, I'm sure that you saw that for verbs ending in AR, we simply drop that ending and add aba. And again, this works for yo, usted, él, ella. When we change the person to tú, nosotros, ustedes, ellos, or ellas, it will change a little bit, but we still have the aba. You can see the aba is still there. But once again, we need to add an S in the tú form. Tú amabas. Nosotros will add a few more letters. Amábamos. Notice that accent mark on the A, okay? Very common for me to hear students say amábamos for these types of verbs, but we have to hit that accent mark on the A. Amábamos. Practice saying that with me. Amábamos, okay? Ustedes, ellos, ellas amaban. So for that plural, we just need to add the N, but we still have that aba in there. Now, let's practice forming the imperfect tense. Now that we know how to form it, I want you to change the infinitive verb to the imperfect tense. And these are all going to be in third person, okay? So just that traditional ending that we just discussed, we don't have to worry about adding any extra letters. These are the same sentences that we saw earlier. So Rosa, frente a la cama de su hija pequeña, observándola mientras. So can you change the verb sonreír and dormir? And tell me what this sentence should say. I'll give you a moment. Okay. Rosa sonreía frente a la cama de su hija pequeña, observándola mientras dormía. Good. Ella muy tranquila. Can you change lucir to the imperfect? Ella lucía muy tranquila. De hecho, Claudia, todas las razones para tener un sueño tranquilo y reparador. De hecho, Claudia tenía todas las razones para tener un sueño tranquilo y reparador. Una madre y un padre que la profundamente y no nada de los conflictos en la familia. Tenía una madre y un padre que la amaban profundamente y no sabían nada de los conflictos en la familia. So that amaban, this has been our only verb so far that hasn't been in that third singular person. So we talked about a mother and a father. So we did have to add the in here. Instead of just saying amaba, it is amaban because we're talking about both people. That was the only tricky one in here. And this is really good news, okay? The imperfect tense is one of the easiest to conjugate in Spanish because every single verb follows the same pattern. There are only 3 irregular verbs. Of course, they're going to be some of the most common. Ir, ser, and ver. These are irregular in the imperfect tense, so we're not going to go into how to conjugate those 3 verbs in this video, but I just wanted you to know that there are only 3 irregular verbs in the imperfect tense. This is great news. All right, guys, so trigger words. The thing about the imperfect tense is that since we're often talking about things that are habitual or continuous, there are certain words that when we see them, they trigger the imperfect tense. Often we're going to see them in the same sentence with the imperfect tense. So you can see them on your screen. We'll just go over them briefly. You can see the translations here to the right. Siempre, casi siempre, todos los días, todos los meses, todos los años, todas las semanas, normalmente, por lo general, frecuentemente, con frecuencia, a menudo, a veces, nunca, casi nunca. So take a look at these examples from our story and see if you can spot one of those trigger words.
Señora Montoya. Rosa siempre sentía una punzada cuando alguien la llamaba así. Se había sentado en el asiento delantero, como siempre lo hacía.
Did you hear it? It was siempre, meaning always. So, Rosa siempre sentía una punzada cuando alguien la llamaba así. Siempre sentía. We have the imperfect sentía because we're talking about something that always habitually happened, not just once. Se había sentado en el asiento delantero como siempre lo hacía. Hacía in the imperfect because it's something that she always did. Let's practice a little bit by changing some sentences slightly. So we have that original sentence. Can you change this to Rosa sometimes felt a twinge when anyone would call her that? All we're doing is changing the word to sometimes. Do you remember? So here's a hint. Sometimes means a veces. So please put the entire sentence together for me. Say it out loud. Even though I'm not hearing you, practice that pronunciation. Say it out loud the best that you can. Rosa a veces sentía una punzada cuando alguien la llamaba así. Let's do it again. Change the original sentence that said Rosa always felt the twinge. Let's change it to Rosa often felt a twinge when anyone would call her that. And if you didn't remember what often is, there we go. A menudo. A menudo. So repeat this entire sentence out loud, just changing that one word. Rosa a menudo sentía una punzada cuando alguien la llamaba así. Let's practice with a different sentence. Now, here, putting ella and specifically specifying that it's she is optional. I've put it here just to make it a little easier for you, but our original sentence in the story didn't have the word ella because we had already established that we were talking about the little girl. Let me just read the sentence for you again. Ella se había sentado en el asiento delantero como siempre lo hacía. So can you change the sentence to she had sat in the front seat as she almost always did? Almost always. Casi siempre. So put the whole sentence together. Ella se había sentado en el asiento delantero como casi siempre lo hacía. Good job. Let's take this sentence. Ella casi siempre lo hacía. She almost always did. Or literally translated, she almost always did it. We have the lo in there. Ella casi siempre lo hacía. So change the sentence to she almost never did. Or she almost never did it. Almost never, casi nunca. Ella casi nunca lo hacía. Casi nunca lo hacía. All right, guys. So in addition to habitual occurrences, the imperfect tense is also used to describe actions that were in progress.
A pesar de sus esfuerzos por no hacerlo, ella todavía lo amaba.
So here's an example. A pesar de sus esfuerzos por no hacerlo, ella todavía lo amaba. So in spite of her efforts not to, she still loved him. She wasn't loving him last month, last week, yesterday at 2 p.m. This is something that she just continuously felt. Todavía lo amaba. So that imperfect tense comes into play. Let's practice again. Ella todavía lo amaba. Can you change the sentence to we still loved him? There are two words that you'll need to change. I'll give you a moment before I give you a hint. Okay, so remember how we are going to conjugate amar. So we find we here on this chart, and then find how we need to create the imperfect tense in the we form. And then notice the structure of the sentence and see where you should put those words. Nosotros todavía lo amábamos. Nosotros todavía lo amábamos. And understand that putting nosotros in there is optional, because even if you just say todavía lo amábamos, that's all you need. The amábamos already tells us who we're talking about. Completely optional whether or not you choose to actually say nosotros. Now we're just going to end by seeing a few more examples so that you just get this overall feel of what is this imperfect tense. Check out these clips.
A Claudia le encantaba ir y ayudar a su madre a conseguir las cosas de la lista.
A Claudia le encantaba ir y ayudar a su madre a conseguir las cosas de la lista. So Claudia loved going to the store. It wasn't just today. This is something that she always loves to do. That brings out the imperfect. Le encantaba. You see that aba, because this is an AR verb.
Claudia observó a su mamá con atención mientras sacaba un pasador de pelo, lo insertaba en el agujero y con unos simples movimientos la puerta estaba abierta.
Claudia observó a su mamá con atención mientras sacaba un pasador de pelo, lo insertaba en el agujero y con unos simples movimientos la puerta estaba abierta. We have several AR verbs. You see aba, 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 and we're just describing the scene. So this is a process that's taking place. Claudia observed this scene unfold. She observed her mom while she was taking out the hairpin, while she was inserting it into the hole, and then the door was open. Aba, 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 sacaba, insertaba, estaba. And that is it, guys. If you have not yet seen Solo un Juego on the channel, check it out. Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. You'll see so many examples of the imperfect tense. We've only picked out a few here, and hopefully this has helped you kind of open up your eyes and ears so that you can start to notice those endings, and start to think about why we are using them in the places where we are, so that you can start to adopt this into your own speech. Guys, I hope that was helpful for you. If it was, please let me know in the comments below. Let me know if you would like to see more of this type of video. And I want to give you a gift before you leave. Go ahead and download the slides that I used for today's slideshow presentation in my resource library linked below, so that you can go through it and practice that information and start to master the imperfect Spanish tense. So simply click the link in the description box below this video and let me know what email address to send your password to, so that you can enter into my free resource library and download today's slides, as well as the transcripts for all of the stories that we've done so far on the channel. If you've missed any of our stories, check them out right here. I'll see you next time, language leader, but until then, don't forget to go out and live your new language today. Bye-bye.